Hi, everybody. My name is Bird Pappas. I'm in Oakland, California. I'm in my living room. I have a gold septum nose ring. I'm sitting next to my desk slash altar. I have a green candle lit and some house plants and some crystals and some very cozy, comforting things. And it's very sunny out. I've been doing metalworking now for about 15 years. And I started off learning traditional blacksmithing actually. Back in college, I saw my first ever like blacksmithing demo. And I had never like seen it before. I kind of knew about it, but I had no relationship with it. I was in like a metal arts sculpture class at the time. And so, this was like 2000, 2001. And so I knew immediately as the first time I saw it that I was like, it felt like a past life experience or something. I was like, oh my gosh, I need to do this. And I just knew in my bones. So I pursued it. I ended up after college landing in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and getting introduced to a really amazing metalworking community there. It was very diverse. There was a lot of women even already then doing metalworking. So acquaintance of mine agreed to do some blacksmithing classes with me, and that was my first experience. And then I went on to do a traditional formal apprenticeship with Frank Turley, who led the granddaddy of blacksmithing school. He's now retired, but that was like coal forge, dirt floor shop, like extension cord. Like the only power we actually used was like a extension cord for an angle grinder. So it was a very, very traditional, and for that I'm very grateful. Actually, that was a wonderful experience. And then yeah, I worked at a foundry in Santa Fe briefly, at a bronze casting foundry. And I just started going around to all the metal shops I could to get work and to start learning. And it luckily somehow it didn't take very long for me to get paid because I was able to pick it up pretty quick. The basics of fabrication. Um, I and that lasted for a few years, and then another blacksmith let me do trade for like a little bit of work and I could use his shop. Um, so that was actually really his name is Helmut Hillenkamp, who's also like a pretty well known. He's really well known for his power hammer skills and actually like repair and building skills with power hammers. So yeah. And then I moved out to the Bay Area. I learned about the Crucible in Oakland, California. A housemate of mine knew somebody who was involved there. And so I came out to visit. Um, I went over there and introduced myself. And I finally met my soon to be mentor, little did I know yet, Carla Hall. And she was a director at the Crucible for many, many years and also had her shop there. And so I ended up working for her, she's like a blacksmith, metal fabricator, welder of many beautiful things from, decorative sculptures to structural. We kind of did it all. And that was really formative for me. I learned so much from her in like the 10 years we worked together. And was also very inspired by her while simultaneously getting really involved in the community there. Like the Crucible was a perfect place to like just kind of be surrounded by other artists and makers of all kinds, from wood, ceramics, jewelry, fine metals to, ferrous metals. So that's sort of the core of my experience in the Bay Area, as a metal worker. Thank you for doing this. I started off, my identity has totally changed and just evolved, I guess. There's no good or bad here and no judgment. It's my process. So that's that is what it is. And I'm grateful for my path and for who I am today, and so I was like a young butch dyke, and that that is still, I wrote this in the thing I sent you, but that's still very much part of my identity actually. And I find it like really important to say that, just because I had like, I wouldn't change my life for anything. And when I was learning metalworking early on in my career, in my young early 20s, mid 20s, it was like, I felt this great sense of pride in being like, I'm doing it against all odds and against all adversity and against the fact that, like, when I was being raised as a girl, no one was supporting me being like, yes, go learn a trade, or yeah, yes, go like drive a truck, or whatever it was. Um, so it and I really felt like, not I didn't feel content with life. And it's like sort of gender track, like this is what you're supposed to do. And so um when when I started getting introduced to metalworking and blacksmithing, that's where it just felt really like, oh yeah, this is familiar. This is like, this makes sense. Like I now get to like work with my hands and like get dirty and sweat and use my brain in a different way and like learn, new wonderful skills and like have awareness of others. Like, am I grinding? Are the sparks flying at somebody? And is the scene safe, for what I'm about to do with this sending sparks everywhere? Or, um, just lighting a fire every day at a forge was really just like, fire has been this powerful, way that people have done every kind of beautiful social ritual, and we still do. And so was just something really grounding and inspiring about it, and cathartic almost, where it was just like, it's so intense, so it's like whatever else was going on in my younger me world, all just was able to just dissipate in those moments where I would get in the shop and just work. And so that was really, and I didn't know it then because I was like, just living my life. But looking back, it was really helping shape who I was on a deeper level. There was the love for the metal, and the love for like heating it up and watching it, bend and move under the hammer. And then there was the like really just coming into to who I was, part of it. It was the whole package. Um, and but finally something felt right, because I was just like working all these other odd jobs, and going to college being like, oh, I don't really know, I don't really have a like clear idea of what I want to do when I grow up, until I did metalworking. So that's really important, I feel, to say. And that, and being a young, obviously queer person in the shop, there, like I said, I met some other women, and I knew that like I was going to be safe. However, like there was definitely, I was also watching myself get treated really different than guys, and I found it really important to show up for that, and just like hold that space and push myself too, to sort of be like, okay, this is how it starts, this is how change happens, is if I can communicate with this one person like, hey, like I deserve respect too, hopefully that'll change them, and they can, and the next time that they interact with a young woman or maybe queer person in their community, like that interaction is different, and so I truly believe, for me, like that's part of my like personal activism, if you can call it that. It's more just like, it's just how I like to be in the world. I like to want to treat others how I want to be treated, So, and that has gotten me, like, I think actually really, really far, because I always somehow draw and attract like a safe scenario to be in, be it where I live, where I work, my community. And, you know, it sometimes has been scary, but I have to always just remember that like I'm okay and I will be okay. So that has really carried me very far. And so when I got to the Bay Area, it was really, really amazing to just get to work in this, like I said, this bigger, huge community actually at the Crucible in the Bay Area. And yeah, so I started learning lots of different things like uh, so steel, forging, blacksmithing, and welding are my main creative outlets. However, many other skills often come with being a more industrial artist, like overhead crane usage or forklifts or other heavy machinery operation and driving big trucks, perhaps. So those are all things again that are like they weren't necessarily like second nature to me at all. Like I never had that growing up. So there's this element of being self-taught. Although now, now in 2022, I feel happy to say that is, I can see has changed even in the last 20 years for sure. Yeah, right. And it's like we're getting there. And I do believe we will get there. So yeah, but those are all things like I didn't know I was going to need to know, you know? So it was like, okay, and then there's like things like how do machines even work? And which has been still maybe not my strongest suit, but like I'm willing to try. I'm interested enough and am appreciative enough of what these machines can do that I want to know. So that's been really cool. Yeah, there's so many layers, right? There's like, and it's all part of this big beautiful process that creates whatever your vision is. And so I will continue to grow and like evolve in that way. I actually at this juncture, I think I would be called, my role at my job is sort of like, I guess I do a little bit of everything, but I'm like almost more the transporter. Like I'm driving like the shop truck with the 20-foot trailer and like going to school to get my CDL Class A trucker's license. So like, again, I was not, being a trucker was not on the the trajectory, but I'm stoked, because it's just like great, another like queer trans person, you know, driving trucks, and like hopefully I can just communicate that if for everyone else out there who's like, yeah, I don't really know, I'm not sure what I want to do, and it's like you can do it all, you know what I mean? Like you can really do anything that comes into your intuition. Like I guess I didn't think I was, but I really was following my intuition. um and I think that doesn't get addressed enough. I think as artists we certainly do, and that um I really love that conversation, because it's just sort of like everything started as a idea or a hunch, or every creation, every painting, every sculpture. So I'm really fascinated with that part of the process. And as far as like integrating that, I mean, for me, the queerness thing has always been like anything I make, anything I make is, especially when blacksmithing, because every hammer mark is unique, right? And with jewelry, every hammer mark, every little imprint you make is specific to that piece. And so I've always been like really excited to make that with my hands, because I know that like this is being made by like a queer, genderqueer, transgender bender person right now. And like that's awesome. Like this is really special. It's special to me, and I hope that translates. Actually, I know it will translate into what I'm making, because the person is going to interact with me, and hopefully it will make, and they'll be happy with what they receive. So, um, I yeah, I just always have felt a lot of pride and joy, like making stuff with my hands and being true to myself and learning more about like, I guess the gender role thing has always sort of been a big thing on the forefront for me, being a metal worker and being queer. Because, in my humble opinion, there's a lot of work to be done on the topic of masculinity, but like these days I'm more interested in things like sacred femininity and sacred masculinity instead of the opposite. And I think like I that's just a recent revelation where I hope to just sort of present that, because I've struggled a lot in the past with being like, well, I'm a butch dyke, but I'm like really also just so masculine. But like, what does that word mean? I'm uncomfortable with that word. I don't really feel like I can fit into any kind of box or shape, even for that matter. Like I don't want to be grouped in with anybody else. And so, I just turned 43, and that's been a it's been a long process, and a lot of ups and downs and uncertainty. And like I find that the sacred masculinity is really a phrase that I find very beautiful and powerful, because like, the world can be a real heavy dark place. And so I want to bring the light. And so like, and even with the metal, like it's like heavy, it's hard, it's sharp, it's so many intense things, and it also is like, it is so elegant and it is so graceful, um and it's so beautiful. And like I just feel very, very grateful for its existence. And yeah, so like the masculinity part, the metalworking and being in this field now for so many years has really, really taught me a lot about myself, about like what my masculinity looks like, what I need to work on, like what I was shown growing up, and all that whole mixture that we all bring to the table in our lives. And so like it took me up until like, my later 30s to just be like, I'm gonna walk this path in like the best way that I can, and own my mistakes, and also have compassion for myself and others when they mess up. So like, and there's plenty of opportunity for that in the world trades world, and in any industry really. So like that, and luckily for me, I'm in a community that is like pretty open to that, like, and it's always amazing to me when I'm like just hanging with the guys, and they're, like we can all totally get along and be cool, and also like joke or be fun with like just the world, and even our own masculinity or our own selves, and it's very healing. And so I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for this opportunity to get to kind of share that for people, because you know when thank goodness we're all at different stages all the time, because if I'm in a good place, hopefully I can help you when you're maybe having a hard moment, so that I know when I'm having a hard moment, there's going to be someone else who's like, oh, I just went through that, okay, cool, like I got you. So for what it's worth, like you can do whatever you want. So I think, yeah, I think, I think that I think I mentioned everything.
Yeah. Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. That was great. No, really, really great. One of the things I'm so glad that you mentioned was the masculinity, because several people have brought it up, specifically kind of embracing what they realized later was toxic masculinity, and then having to like reel it back and reassess what it meant, um, because a lot of people wanted to shed the expectations of gender that they'd been kind of fighting against, so yeah, so it was really great to hear, and the sacred part of it, that we've had some people come in with the divine feminine, in this project, but not nobody has mentioned that the sacred masculinity, which is really great to kind of hear the idea, um, and not that it's all about negative towards masculinity, because both exist, and there's good ways for them to exist. Yeah.
Oh,
So
oh, cool. Thank you. I'm like,
yeah.
this is actually the first real moment that I'm talking about it. Like, I always want to think, oh, I'll make an Instagram post or something, but it's hard to just get that ball rolling for myself, because I'm actually just really sensitive. So I think what held me back for a long time was being like, oh my God, do people just think I'm a dude, like a cis dude, and like what? And then like over time, I realized, well, probably they do. So that's where you're at, Bird. And so like, if they do, how about show them like the best version of a guy that they could maybe hopefully ever want to meet. And like, that's what helps me a lot. Cause I'm just like, well, it's I was so fearful in my early 20s because it was so different back then, in the early 2000s. Like, it was not yet really that acceptable to be trans. And so I was pretty terrified of whatever I was feeling. So and then the internalized like whatever of like the not liking myself for like wanting to be more masculine presenting. So that was its whole own thing. And so now it's like, yeah, like if I like worrying so much about what other people think of me is such a drain of my energy, that is like the same energy I need to take and thrive and make my art and show up for work and show up for my partner, and be a good friend. So like, and that's a path. And like, again, hopefully anybody who's watching this who's experiencing that can like, that'll help maybe give them that little boost, plant a seed.
On the screen, there is a white Eastern European man who is located in his living room in the middle of city of Tallinn in Estonia, and I'm surrounded with my everyday items like books, plants, a little kitchen, my clothes. Yeah. Originally, I'm trained as a classical blacksmith. I studied in Estonian Academy of Arts in the department of jewelry and blacksmithing. There we have one department, but two directions. So when you enter there, you choose if you are either going to the direction of jewelry and work with the concepts of body and jewelry-ness and all the other contemporary jewelry topics, or you work rather with bigger scale, with materials like iron, copper, other materials that are usually used in public space or for making sculptures. And I felt more attracted for chose the blacksmithing side. I graduated, as I said, as a blacksmith, but throughout the entire time when I spent in the department, I felt strong urge to also try other materials. I was really attracted by ceramics. I loved glass. I tried textiles. It's also something I did when I was a child. My grandmother taught me how to do embroidery, how to crochet, how to make my own clothes. So I didn't have any hierarchies between any of the mediums of any materials. Basically, I wanted to study everything when I went to the academy. I just opened the list of departments, and blacksmithing just felt the coolest thing that was in the list. So I thought, okay, why should I go to study blacksmithing? I thought, okay, when somebody comes and asks, hey, what do you do? What did you study? And they say, oh yeah, I studied blacksmithing. Then it's like the coolest thing I can say for another person. So that's basically the reason. So until nowadays, I still feel super connected to metalwork and also blacksmithing. I have my own studio. I don't have a special ironwork studio. I have more studio for any kinds of mediums. I have a room for metalwork. I have a room for woodwork. So I do a lot of carving, a lot of engraving, a lot of bigger metal forms, welding, casting, so on. But I also do like embroidery. In example, just yesterday I finished this beautiful, beautiful face mask, which is entirely embroidered. So yeah, for me, as I said, there's no hierarchy in between the mediums. It's not that something is manly thing to do and something is more feminine thing to do. For me, it's really something very manly thing to do, especially when I was serving in the army and I found out that most of the guys cannot handle the needle. So I felt like, how bad can somebody be? How can you be a proper soldier, like this ultra masculine soldier, when you can't even repair your clothes? So yeah, that's basically my relationship with materials and different mediums. So what means queerness for me? I would say that this is something which is opening up for me more and more. I haven't never read any articles or any theory about the studies of queerness. I know that it's a thing. Somewhere it's a thing. In Estonia, it's not yet a thing. When I grew up in Estonia, it's a former Soviet Union country. I grew up in the border city of Soviet Union. So you can imagine that when I grew up, there was not even this kind of concept of being gay. In Soviet Union, there were no disabled people, there were no gays, there were no queer people. There was not even that kind of vocabulary there. So basically, first time when I realized that there is this kind of gayness or queerness, basically hit me when I moved to capital city, where I went to art academy to study, and suddenly I found myself from a totally different world. For me, personally, I see queerness as something which is in between the conventional borders. So when I grew up, I always grew up in this bubble of classical Eastern European man who is a manly man, who is following the role models of other manly men of his society and who has to fit into the cap which is made for you. You have to marry, get children, get yourself a loan, all that. When I found myself from art academy, I found out that, oh yeah, It's not the only way to be. It's not the only solution for life. So those borders became much more foggier, because I would say that if I would go to a regular Western European gay party, then I would still look like a macho Eastern European man, or this kind of regular Eastern European man. But if I'm among our macho guys, then I'm really queer. I'm definitely not fitting into this main idea of manliness. So for me, being queer is someone who don't bother himself too much with fitting in, that you have to fill this gap. Also, queerness for me means flexibility, that at the moment, my beliefs and my gender and my ideas about gender can be like they are, but maybe next year they're totally different. When my perspective opens even more somewhere, I find something more interesting, I have this possibility to change. So queerness is for me about not fitting in or not bothering yourself with fitting in, and ability and this freedom of transforming from one to another. So yeah, that's my concept personally for queerness. So yeah, how for me queerness and metal connects. I could say that for me, whole nature is queer. When I before said that it's something that changes, then basically the whole nature is in a constant change. Things get fixed meanings and fixed forms only in our heads. So basically objects around us, my smartphone, my glasses, my shirt, they are what they are, this kind of culture constructions only in my head. But maybe after 50 years, they are soil. Maybe they are, I don't know, somewhere in another form. So basically what we see as regular iron, it's this iron bar. But iron, the natural form of iron is not a bar of iron. When we look how iron originally looks, it looks mostly brown, sometimes blackish brown. It's very brittle. It's almost like a sandstone. And then we just dig it out. The original form of iron is rust. We dig this rust out of the earth. We put it to the furnace. We get solid bar of iron, which we recognize. It's this. It has this plasticity. It allows to make objects from it. You can weld it. You can make ships out of it. But on the moment you lose attention, iron tries to get this layer of rust, a layer of patina on it again. And basically, from the moment it starts to rust, it does anything to get back to its original form, to the earth. It's the same with ancient Roman portraits. You have this huge marble rock, which is in the form or in the shape of a human being. The original shape for marble is not a human being. So what happens? These portraits lose their noses, their ears. Marble does everything to get back to the earth, to return its original shape, and to just get rid of this cultural construction. So basically the same thing happens with sculptures. Bronze sculptures, iron, cast iron sculptures. Basically every sculpture is queer, because in our heads, sculptures get ready when you put it somewhere to the city square maybe, or to the park, and the major comes and cuts through this red ribbon, and the sculpture is opened and the sculpture is ready. But what happens next? It starts to get patina. Maybe after 50 years, very angry people come and put a rope around the neck of this, I don't know, politician or this cultural hero of 50 years ago, and just tear it down and throw this sculpture into the water. Sculptures are in constant change. Winston Churchill was covered with this human-made patinas, with this red paint and everything. So for me, this is the real life of a sculpture, and every sculpture changes, and that's for me the queerness of sculpture. In the beginning, some sculpture of Columbus can be a sculpture of a hero. Now a sculpture of Columbus is a sculpture of slavery, or the master of slavery. Sculptures are in constant change. So in that sense, we can say that also Churchill and Columbus were really queer in that sense. So that's, basically something that defines queerness of metal for me, the ability to change.
I'm Eleanor Rose. I'm a white woman sitting in my bedroom with white walls. I'm wearing a brown cable knit sweater, and there's a painting behind me, and I have a messy kind of updo. So the metalwork that I do is tool making and machining. I do a lot of casting. I kind of fell into all of it during my undergrad when I was was getting my sculpture degree, and I graduated and I didn't have any tools to do the woodwork that I was taught to do, and so I started making tools, and it just kind of ended up being not the means to the end anymore. It just ended up being the end. So I really enjoy like all kinds of metalsmithing, but I'm often not considered a metalsmith so much by some of the community. But I don't know. Sometimes I feel like I'm more of a tinkerer. So I specialize in foundry, bronze casting, hoping to move into iron soon. So queerness is complicated, I guess. I'm sure everyone would agree with that. I view myself as queer in the fact that I am trans. I came out 3.5 years ago in the midst of grad school. And I don't know that I entirely love the word queer because it feels so like othering, but that's what I view queerness as, is I guess what the typically defined thing is. But I also I don't actually know what my sexuality is currently. I still trying to discover that. But I guess it's like gyne or pan or whatever have you. I think it's just not straight and cis, I guess, is what my definition would be.
Totally. It's been really interesting to see how many people were more vague, right, in their identities than people used to be required to be very rigid in their identities. There's way more space now. Like we allow people to have that space. Society does, which is an interesting shift.
Awesome. Occasionally I'll feel like I'm teaching a woodworking course right now, and there's so many non-binary students in it, and I'm like, I think I'm like the last like binary trans person. Which is like such a great feeling. I wish I had had any kind of freedom to explore myself in my youth.
Yeah, when I see these kids, I'm like, wow, how amazing. You have so many different possibilities, and you can use all these different identities to like construct yourself,
Yeah.
in the ways that you want. And, that wasn't available to me. And a lot of people, older than us who just, they weren't given any choices, and
Yeah.
it was like this or nothing.
Yeah.
Now the kids these days have so many choices. I'm just like,
Yeah. I mean, I remember like broaching the subject of being trans like very, very carefully. Like, what is this thing? And my parents were like hyper religious and like gun-toting Democrat kind of type, or not Democrat, sorry, gun-toting Republican types. And it was like, did not go over well. It's like, that's a sin, you'll go to hell. Blah. And I was like, oh, well, I guess I'm not touching that for a while. So,
yeah.
I mean, they've luckily changed immensely in the last decade, but yeah, I would have just like loved to have been able to like kind of discover myself sooner than 27.
Yeah, totally. That experience of parents being supportive is also very new to me, and I think in general overall, like there's a whole generation coming up with parents who are like, are you sure you're not gay? You're like, what? And as opposed to that you're going to hell if you're anything but the very square normative defined roles.
Yeah, I mean, I live for those videos of people like coming out to their parents like, oh yeah, we know.
Yeah.
That's great.
It's just such a different time, and it's really good to see. I think sometimes there's some, what's that called, Schadenfreude, like about the different kinds of experiences people are having as they find themselves. But I think it's great.
Yeah, totally.
May their life be easy.
Yeah. I mean, like, I can't imagine what's going to happen in the next 50 years. Well, but
yeah.
I mean, it'll be just normal. It'll be great.
It'll be beautiful. Absolutely.
I mean, I guess I find metalsmithing like queerer than woodworking, at least in my own personal kind of world. I've always felt I guess I need to like go into a little background, but when I came out, I did not want to be in the wood shop, and I still kind of have some of that fear, and that was like a problem because I was getting a degree in woodworking when I came out, and so like that space in itself did not feel safe. It didn't feel comforting, and so I threw myself into metalsmithing like full time basically, and but I was like fully accepted within the little like jewelry department at or art metals department at my alma mater, and then I was able to just kind of stay within my studio. I like the small nature of, I guess, metals, and I know that doesn't always apply to things, but it applies to my practice at least, is that I can be in my safe space, and then I feeling safe, and then feeling safe mentally. It's just like this like beautiful little like world, and that's why I do it. It's just because it's like it's not this like big open exposed feeling, I guess, is where I'm coming from. So yeah, I mean, it is like metals was a huge part of my coming out, was a huge part of my like opening up to queerness, and like fully accepting myself. So that's, yeah, I guess that's what it means.
It's beautiful. That's great. It's nice to hear. I'm curious, just for myself, when you talk about the expansiveness of the woodworking space, like what is the quantifiable difference? Is it the way the tools are arranged, or is it the?
I guess it's the need for crazy like big machinery, and like, I mean, a table saw takes up almost as much as my entire studio space for my small metals work. So yeah, and then like I particularly have always worked in these big open shops, so it's always like bunch of people, or I'm always surrounded by a bunch of people versus I can go into a small little room and be by myself and like put my podcast on and not be bothered by anyone. Yeah, it's like very like self-centering and meditative, I guess, versus the kind of like loud industrial environment of wood shops that I've constantly worked in. Yeah, for like the last decade has been mostly wood shops like that. And my friend Aspen described it as being in a being in a wood shop, like being in a place with no roof and constantly being whipped by acorns. And even if you're not being whipped by acorns, there's always that like possibility. And that's always how it's always felt with um, these like, you know, overbearing, domineering, cis white dudes in these shop spaces. And yeah, just always this like fear is like, oh, is someone going to take offense at my like existence today? And I don't feel that way with metalsmithing or in metalsmithing environments mostly. I can't speak for blacksmithing. I don't function in those very much. So, but at least small metals work has been just a lot more peaceful and welcoming.
So my name is Theo Somerville Scott. I'm an artist blacksmith and maker, sculptor, all-round kind of person who makes things, I suppose. I'm sitting in my living room. It's a well-lit room. I have a big brown beard and a shaved head and glasses, and I'm wearing a grey t-shirt. My work is really centered around hot forged metal. So working in steel, and so that would come under sort of artist blacksmithing as a sort of whole term, I suppose. But I would also class myself as a sculptor, artist. I enjoy doing woodwork and ceramics, and so a bit of lots of different bits and bobs. So anything I can really use to convey what I want to convey. As a choice of medium, but certainly for my degree work and where when I went to university, I studied artist blacksmithing. So yeah, so hot forged metal in a sculptural sense. So looking at form and shape and how to manipulate metal. That's what I got really interested in as I went through. So yeah, hot forged metal is what I would say. Yeah, so queerness is such a huge thing to try and tackle when you're trying to condense, you know, queerness as one thing. It's really difficult. I don't really think it can be done. I think it applies differently for everyone and their own experiences of the world. I think it sort of has many faces and feelings for everyone. So I think I would really condense it or think of it personally as being a sort of energy, I suppose, that sort of lives within every queer person and their experiences. But I think also that there is a flip side to that in that it sort of occupies a space of being sort of kind of formed by sort of heteronormative societal structures, I suppose. So ways in which we as queer people have had to survive historically, and create ways of living and expressing ourselves and keeping ourselves safe, and being able to live authentically, I suppose. And so yeah, there is a kind of protection of queerness. It offers a sort of way to express our authentic self, but also as a protective measure of those who might want to do harm to us, I suppose. So that's kind of how I see queerness, as this sort of energy that sort of, it can be both really, really good, but there is also a flip side, not to queerness, but perhaps the way that queerness is perceived. You can't ignore that it has a sort of knock-on effect of how it can be, how it can come into the world, as it were, sort of the ether. Yeah, so I think it can manifest itself in sort of joy and openness, and sort of wonder and freedom and pride, I suppose, in a really cheesy sense, um, and for for everyone to live however they see it. So it can't really be pinned down to one sort of thing. I think it's so different to everyone and their own experiences. Yeah, I think for queer metal, for myself and what I experienced when I really explored it, is the kind of way to. I'm really fascinated by space, and how space can be manipulated and used, and form, and texture, and sort of the way something looks, and how it makes people feel. I think for myself personally, creating sculptural work, installation work, for people to see, I think artworks, or certainly sculpture and art as a whole, works it best when it challenges, when it gets the person looking at it to feel something. I think that's the crux of it, really, is that you're trying to get someone to feel something, whether that's happiness or pleasure, um, or making someone feel uncomfortable or comfortable, um, sort of freaking them out perhaps, or getting them to think that's really weird. There's a sort of juxtaposition to that. Certainly, I think with my work, Orlando, is that you see this sort of tough metal, sort of industrial uh, material, but you look at it and it's fuzzy and pink, and you touch it and you think that's not meant to be like that. And I think that's what I really enjoyed, it being this huge, big piece that took up a lot of space. And I think that's important too. I think in some ways to take up space in a world, I think, that is where queer people have had to make space, and queer spaces that perhaps weren't queer before, perhaps, in order to make some noise and make ourselves known. So I guess in that sense, I relish in taking up space in that. So yeah, I think yeah, and materiality and movement, I think, is really important to me. So looking at something, seeing how people look at it, engaging with it, sort of provoke all sorts of thoughts and feelings. So for me, that's kind of what queer metal means. But I think a lot of my artwork, ever since I was very young, has sort of centered around those sort of societal and sort of queer themes, I suppose. So I think my family, certainly, I come from a family of that's very sort of homonormative, I suppose, as opposed to heteronormative. So um, my both of my parents are queer, and they're, I have four parents, so there's lots of queerness. I couldn't escape it. But uh, I do also think it gives a bit of a unique view on things, um, perhaps slightly, I suppose, perhaps naive in terms of looking at the world. And I know that I'm very fortunate in that. I'm very privileged to have that. And I think that's it's been quite tricky at times. I think just because I do engage with the experiences of other queer people, but coming from a place of such privilege is it can be quite difficult to work with. But it certainly surrounded me throughout my life. So within moving to queer metalwork, and exploring that has really been fascinating to me. So yeah, that's about it for that one, I think. I know
Yeah, I remember.
I
Oh,
went on
you're
a lot.
fine. No, 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 not at all. It was great. I remember reading that you had the queer parents, and how you were just talking about it being a privilege, but it's kind of a wonderful thing to have that kind of acceptance and understanding, and not have the hurdle of trying to understand and find the words and get the acceptance or receive the rejection that happens to so many queer people. It's very beautiful.
Yeah, certainly, certainly that is the case. But I think what I perhaps was trying to get to is that that there is that wonderful privilege, and it's great. But I think in terms of relating to other queer people, perhaps who have not been so fortunate, was something that has struck me when I've experienced it. That I can relate to some level, but also not, which can be quite tricky, I suppose. So um, I suppose creating work about queerness for me comes from a bit of a unique place, in that it's queerness in its sort of full, loud happiness. Whereas I think for some people, perhaps queerness for them in their artwork may come from a place of struggle, of real pain and heartache, which is very saddening and moving to look at. But I think it's it is a bit strange for me, I think, in some ways, to come at it from the angle of knowing that I've always been accepted, that everything was going to be okay. But I do acknowledge that privilege, and I think that's something that I think really came to the front when I was creating a lot of work and writing my dissertation. Was just that I that recognition of privilege and experience and other people's experience, and I think of people creating work, and I sort of took a long hard look at myself and thought, I'm a white middle class man, cis man, who actually doesn't encounter a lot of struggle. A queer person, but coming from a queer family is something that I sort of had to take a long hard look at. So a lot of my themes with Orlando certainly was about the looking at gender and expression and stereotypes of gender and identity, and that sort of thing. Moving metal, manipulating it, changing it at its when it perhaps didn't want to be changed, forcefully changing it, texture, color, that sort of bright pink fuzziness, that sort of stereotype of what is a feminine color, what is a masculine color, what are all these things, was really interesting to do. But I think writing about this kind of stuff, certainly I was inspired by. I mean, Orlando comes from the Virginia Woolf novel, certainly about the character Orlando changing sex and gender, and there being no difference in Orlando's character in that. But I think the more and more I spoke about that, the more I thought, actually, I can't speak for people's experiences who are trans, non-binary, gender non-conforming. I can't speak for those people, but I can, I suppose, recognize that and create work about it. And so make sure I'm not talking for those people, but talking with those people, letting that be a way to get the conversation going and get people talking about these things. And so, yeah, I never really wanted to talk for people. I think that's where it was quite tricky to work with. How far does one go really with some of my experiences, but I can't talk for people. So that was quite interesting to work through. Yeah.
That's one of the kind of, it would maybe seem obvious, but until you're doing a project like this, you know, like the amazing diversity within this community, even something so focused as queer metalsmiths, you would think there'd just be a few or something, but everybody's experience is really different. And, you know, we have, you know, people who've had immigration stories of all kinds, you know, people who live in rural areas versus urban areas, people working class versus middle class, people who work within the more traditional blacksmithing and traditional jewelry, fine jewelry, and the art blacksmithing and the art jewelry, all these different perspectives, you know, and positions and use of words and identities. It's really, really like it's a beautiful thing, you know, that there isn't, none of us can speak for anybody else. It's very rare for people to have the same experiences.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that is wonderful. I think that's one of the great things about this and about this project is really learning and talking and sharing experiences and looking at different people's experiences and their work and what they do and how they, what work they make, how they make it. And also looking at the similarities of I experience that too, or I don't, or I recognize that experience, or perhaps I don't, or I think learning about all these things is really the key to understanding everything. And yeah, it seems pretty obvious, but it is wonderful to see all these different people creating work.
Yeah.